more organizers, young folks like Allison and myself, and hopefully you guys someday, and people who are willing to go out, organize a certain turf, recruit volunteers, build relationships with those volunteers, which is kind of the key, and then getting those folks to go out and talk to their neighbors, to the undecided voters. And so, that whole thing is very similar in the structure of the campaign that's been set up, and I think that's a really good thing. But in terms of the enthusiasm, it's way low. But that feels much more similar to the early part of the Obama campaign. So I did the Obama campaign for 17 months. So the early part was a lot harder, a lot more similar to this.
All right. What makes a good campaign?
A good campaign? Yeah, that's hard. I think a good campaign is, one that's disciplined, that is very clear on what its objectives are, and one that makes its decisions based on the data. And that's I'm biased to say that because what I do is I'm the voter file manager, I'm the database manager for the campaign. But if a lot of times campaigns will just make decisions based on someone's gut feeling about what's going on, and really that's unscientific. It hurts the effort. I think if you base it all on sort of your gut decisions and you're not looking into, well, what are people actually saying in the areas that we care about, and looking at kind of the numbers more closely. So making decisions based on numbers and data, I think, is really important. Two, I think it's also important to focus on relationship building. A lot of people think that you just got to get your message right, and the message is what it means to say message is kind of like a talking point. It's sort of like what are the main phrases that the campaigner is trying to advocate for in when they see a headline on or like a title in the newspaper, what would they ideally have that headline look like? That's what our message would be. And right now it's Patty Murray is helping people in solving problems. So that's the message. Okay, it's helping people solving problems. And we want to repeat that as many times as we possibly can. That's good, but that, I believe, falls flat without actual relationships that are being built between volunteers and the organizers. And then also between the organizers, the volunteers, and their neighbors. So those are the things we've seen in the data. This is so they're related, that we've seen in the data, and this is a book, I'll pass this around just in case, and this is available at the library too, if you guys want to look at that. But this book shows a lot of the research showing that people are most influenced not by advertisements, right? We see them and they're just kind of like, what? Clearly you guys, we've seen this kind of thing before. What actually influences people was what the data says, and it's what I also think is right, is what their neighbors think, what other people have come and spoken to them and conversed about. And so I think if a campaign gets that and focuses their operation on building relationships and keeping very, very close track of who their supporters are using their data, then they build a list of supporters, of people who are unlikely to vote, and then you can turn those folks out, and then you'll win the election. And so if you do put those things together, the quantitative side and the qualitative, and you marry them in the right way, then I think the campaign will be very successful. If that makes sense.
What do you think one of the biggest issues today?
I'm sorry?
What do you think one of the biggest issues today is, and how is Patty Murray helping that?
How's Patty Murray helping that? I think one of the biggest issues is the economy, for sure. That's clearly the number one issue on voters' minds right now. The way Patty Murray is helping that is a whole host of ways. One, she voted for Barack Obama's stimulus bill, which most independent economists agree kept our country from entering into a depression. We're still in a severe recession. Well, technically people say we're not anymore, but job numbers still aren't where they should be. So the unemployment rate is still really high. So the stimulus program, I think, voting with the president, I would say, is one thing she's done to help the economy, for sure. But she also does a lot of bringing really good projects back to Washington State. So, for instance, as a part of that stimulus program, she actually went out and fought for Washington specifically, and one of the largest Recovery Act grants is happening at the Hanford site, which is this nuclear waste site in Washington that is just like costs, to clean up nuclear waste is like billions of dollars. It's extremely expensive, and it's one of the largest pieces of the stimulus bill actually, or the Recovery Act is going to Washington State, and so that's going to help people have jobs and stuff like that, and it also helps the environment. So I think that's one of the biggest things. But also, she came out and fought for. She's fighting for Boeing in particular. That's also another huge thing. Is that Boeing is one of the big employers here in Washington State, and they're competing with Airbus, who is a European airplane manufacturer. And kind of what the World Trade Organization ruled that Airbus, that France was giving illegal subsidies to Airbus, meaning that they were giving them, so it was like the government was giving Airbus money to sell their planes at a cheaper price than Boeing could produce because they weren't getting the same government subsidies. And so Patty Murray has been fighting to make it so that the people who are awarding contracts, because the State Department is trying to, or the Defense Department is trying to decide who they're going to buy their planes from, Airbus or Boeing. And because of those subsidies, it makes it harder for Boeing to compete against Airbus. So what she's done is entered a bill that hasn't been passed yet, but to make a requirement so that the Defense Department has to look at that unfair kind of playing field when they're making that contract decision. So that will definitely help workers in the United States because it's an uneven balance with the subsidies, the illegal trade subsidies.
So I heard Pat Murray is support for the Obama's health care reform.
Yeah.
And I think lots of people have had a concern about this reform may harm the U.S. economy in some way. So how do you respond to that?
About healthcare reform in particular? Yeah. Well, I think if you look at there's a group called the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. Their job is to be independent. They're a group of economists that they work for Congress, and their job is to say, okay, when legislation has come up, their job is to say this legislation is going to cost so much, or it's going to help the economy so much, or it's going to cause a deficit, or whatever. And so they're the referee in terms of like how is a bill going to either hurt or harm the economy. And they say that the healthcare reform bill will reduce the deficit by $140 billion over 10 years. So, and then in the next 10 years, so 20 years out, in the next 10 years, it's supposed to actually lower the deficit, the U.S. deficit, by $1 trillion. So that's one thing. The other thing it's doing is right now, it's also keeping some of these things are being phased in over time. So most of health reform actually hasn't happened yet. Most of it will happen in 2014, unfortunately. I'd rather it happen right now. But some of the things have already kicked in. Like, for instance, you guys, if your parents have health insurance, you'll be able to stay on their health insurance until you're 26, which is cool. Because when I graduated from college in 2007, I was 23, I guess, and I was no longer on my parents' health insurance as soon as I graduated college, right? So I had to go out and then buy health insurance on my own as a result of that, and I didn't have a job right away, and so I just put it on my credit card, and I was still paying that off. But which is good for you guys is that as soon as if you go to college and as soon as you graduate, you'll still be able to stay on that health insurance until you're 26. So that type of thing I think it really helps the economy because if you go to the doctor and you can't pay for it, that hurts everyone really, and you should be able to, they need those funds. And so if there are fewer people covered, then, there's less business for the doctors and they're going to make less money and it's harder, I think. So that's one thing. There's a lot in the healthcare bill. If you guys are more interested in the healthcare bill, look at the Kaiser Family Foundation. They have a really good timeline of implementation. Like I said, most of it goes in 2014, which is unfortunate because the re-election for Obama would be in 2012. and 2 years after that is when most of the reforms actually happen. But the Congressional Budget Office says that it definitely saves money over the next 10 years and even more so over the next 20. So next question? Yeah.
So what has been the biggest obstacle with this campaign?
With this campaign?
Yeah.
I'd say the biggest obstacle has just been getting people motivated to do the work that we're asking them to do. So let me go get my whiteboard, guys. Give me a second. I want to show you guys.